She didn't raise her voice. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. Jenny just said the one sentence every long-suffering partner eventually reaches after patience burns out: I can't be miserable every day. There's nothing dramatic about that line on the surface, until you realize it took her a decade to say it out loud. Jenny has looked exhausted before, annoyed before, even hurt before. But this time was different. She looked done. Not temporarily upset, not mid-fight energy. Done. And the scariest part? She wasn't angry. She was calm. People underestimate calm. It sounds soft, but it usually shows up after someone's made the kind of decision they don't plan on reversing. That's not resentment. That's resignation. Sumit heard it too. You could almost see the flicker of fear behind his practiced smile. The man who had spent years stretching every problem into the future suddenly realized there might not be a future left to stretch. Because when Jenny returned to America and walked into the tell all without him, something shifted. She wasn't waiting. She wasn't covering for him. She wasn't adjusting anymore. She was standing still for once, but not in India. Not in the place where she'd always stayed too long. She was standing still on her own terms, her own soil, breathing her own air. And instead of apologizing for it, she looked comfortable. What Sumit didn't seem to grasp, at least not yet, was just how much he had relied on Jenny's flexibility. Not her love, her flexibility. The way she always said okay one more time. The way she adjusted her expectations. The way she tolerated silence, delay, half-truths, long sighs, and soft promises that aged like warm milk. Jenny aged in a different way. Waiting for him to choose faster. Waiting for his slow courage to outrun his deep fear of losing his parents. Waiting to be more than someone in the room. Waiting to be someone on paper. Waiting for the air to clear from another shock, the catfish reveal, the secret marriage, the family rejection, the back-and-forth mind games that always ended in, just give me more time. This time, she didn't give time. She took some back. Years of being the emotional mule in a relationship built on carrying hope while he clutched comfort, he got to live in the protective echo chamber of tradition, of indecision, wrapped in obligation. She got to live in confusion, never fully chosen, never fully abandoned. It's the worst kind of middle. But Jenny had been collecting data in silence. Every delay became a receipt. Every compromise she made, she remembered. And one morning, she stopped seeing time as hopeful. She started seeing it as a bill she couldn't keep paying. That's when people stop asking for change. Because their love hasn't disappeared, it's just been replaced by clarity. She didn't leave in a fight. She left in her own voice. That's what terrified him. This wasn't their first argument. But it might be their last truth. So when she walked into that studio alone, was it freedom or just revenge in a prettier dress? It didn't start with culture. It didn't start with age. It started with a lie, a screen name, a fake photo, a fabricated identity. Sumit wasn't just hiding from his parents. He was hiding from Jenny. And she didn't walk away. She stayed, convinced the lie was a rough beginning to something real. Maybe it was. But every time she overlooked a red flag, the bar for what she'd accept moved lower. Then came the next revelation. He was already married. Not theoretically, not someday, but legally, presently, actually married to someone else. Jenny didn't leave. Again. She stayed. Because somehow, love turns denial into duty when you've already spent years investing in a future that feels one decision away from perfect. But with Sumit, every decision came at a crawl, and every truth had to be forced into the light like it was a confession instead of a conversation. That's the pattern that set everything in motion. Jenny gave up her friends, her career, her country, her comfort. Moved across the world, tolerated public disgust, listened to his mother call her names on camera and off. And most importantly, she gave up time. Time she could never get back. And what did Sumit offer in return? Promises. But only the kind with built-in conditions. He didn't say no. He said not yet. He didn't refuse. He hesitated. It's more subtle. You don't even notice you're being stalled. Because stalling wears the costume of caution. But years passed. And every one of his delays came at somebody's cost. And it was never his. He kept his parents close. He protected their approval like it was a paycheck. He made sure their feelings got the benefit of the doubt, while Jenny's needs got labeled as impatience. In his world, time was a buffer. In hers, it was a punishment. And the worst part? The longer she stayed, the more she had to pretend staying made sense. Because walking away after 5 years feels harder than 1. Walking away after a secret marriage, the yelling, the late truths, it feels like confirming you wasted your life. So she didn't leave. Not then. But the imbalance never stopped growing. If she cried, she was emotional. If he hesitated, he was respecting tradition. If she asked for a timeline, she was pressuring him. If he ducked the conversation, he was being respectful of the process. It became a relationship where love was measured by who folded last. Every time she believed they were finally on solid ground, something cracked. Either a new lie came out or an old boundary moved. And slowly, love didn't feel like partnership anymore. It felt like convincing someone to meet you halfway while they reassured you they'd try. Eventually, when someone dodges hard choices, someone else pays their price. If love asked her to wait, why was only her clock ticking? They said moving in with the family was a financial decision, a chance to save money, a temporary fix. But what Jenny walked into wasn't support, it was surveillance. And what she left behind wasn't space, it was self-respect. Inside that house, nothing felt hers. Not the bedroom, not the kitchen, not even the air. You see, when a home becomes someone else's kingdom, your comfort turns into a courtesy. Jenny had to think twice before putting on shorts, taking a breath, or sitting down to watch TV in her own skin. Because in that house, even rest needed permission. Sumit had grown up in that environment. To him, boundaries blurred by family were just normal. But normal doesn't mean humane. And for Jenny, every little thing started feeling like a test. What she wore, how late she woke up, whether she looked respectful enough, all became ammunition for quiet disapproval. It was no longer about marriage. It became about compliance. Even when intimacy came up, she had to tiptoe. Because bedroom doors weren't just thin, they were judged. Try being married and needing your in-laws' indirect permission to have private moments with your partner, and then being told it's your fault when it gets awkward. That wasn't culture. That was control. And it ran one way. Sumi could grumble about house rules. He could make jokes about his mother's expectations. But the moment Jenny spoke up, she was ungrateful, disrespectful, too Western. The same pressure he complained about became sacred when she noticed it. He wanted sympathy when it crushed him, but called her selfish when it crushed her. That's how double standards hide. Behind tradition. Behind politeness. Behind the lazy claim that she knew what she signed up for. But nobody signs up to disappear. She didn't move there to become a ghost with chores. She came for partnership and ended up performing for approval. And when she cracked, she wasn't loud. She was tired. That's what made it harder to dismiss. She wasn't rebelling. She was surviving. But Sumit kept holding both sides. Husband at night, obedient son by day, and Jenny sat in between, watching herself disappear one compromise at a time without even being allowed to call it what it was. Control. Love shrinks fast when space costs more than silence. The house gave them shelter, but stole their marriage. They didn't move in with his parents out of peace. They moved out of panic. Rent costs money. Groceries cost money. Starting a business with no backup plan? That costs more than people think, and the calf wasn't making enough to carry either of them. It sounded like a fresh chapter. But behind the Instagram smiles, it was survival mode dressed up as stability. Jenny didn't marry Sumit for luxury, but she didn't expect risk to be the daily routine either. The calf wasn't just a financial bet. It was emotional leverage. Because when your only source of independence is fragile, walking away starts to feel impossible. She'd already sold the house back home, already drained savings, already crossed oceans for a person who couldn't promise her much more than potential. The kind of freedom people talk about? That wasn't available here. Not when she couldn't afford to lose him, even if she wasn't sure she had him. Meanwhile, Sumit had fallback. If things blew up, he had parents to feed him, a house to sleep in, a bed waiting. Jenny had, what? Her pride? Her suitcase? Maybe enough for a short flight home, if a daughter would front the bill. That's the part nobody wants to say out loud. When money goes missing, power shifts. The person with the softer landing gets to talk slower, decide later, stall longer. And even if Sumit didn't mean to, he ended up with control simply because his reality had a safety net. Hers didn't. That's why Jenny's discomfort grew so loud. It wasn't just about the calf not taking off fast enough. It was about knowing that even inside their marriage, she was the one whose survival kept depending on somebody else's decisions. If the business failed, Sumit always had family. Jenny had uncertainty. So every financial choice doubled as emotional weight she had to carry without complaint. Support me. Be patient. Trust the vision. And if it fails, swallow the result. Love turned into a debt cycle. And every delayed payoff stretched trust thinner. Jenny didn't sign up to be dependent. She signed up to be a partner. But the bills didn't care what role she thought she had. And suddenly, asking for time stopped feeling romantic. It started feeling like a trap. Financial control doesn't look like love, but it often wears its clothes. She wasn't his wife anymore. She was collateral for comfort. When Jenny walked into that studio in America, alone, no one had to ask what changed. You could hear it. You could see it. Something settled in her posture. Something different from the woman who used to twist herself into knots explaining, defending, apologizing. She wasn't just in a different country. She was in a different state of mind. She didn't owe anyone context anymore. That's the power of stepping back onto soil, where your name isn't always questioned and your clothes aren't reviewed like a behavior report. In India, she had to adapt to survive. In America, she got to be Jenny again. A woman, not a warning. A wife, not a guest. A person with full thoughts, not filtered ones. And when she spoke, it didn't sound like bitterness. It sounded like peace. Cold, clear peace. It didn't beg. It didn't bargain. It didn't bend. That scared people more than an outburst ever could. Because when someone finally gets quiet, it means they've already had the fight in their own head. It means they've already done the bargaining without you. And they've already accepted the outcome. Whatever it is. Sumit, still in India, was left holding the outdated script, trying to act like the story hadn't already been rewritten. Being home reminded Jenny how small her world had become with him. In the U.S., she didn't have to ask for space. She had it. She didn't have to prove herself at every dinner table. She could breathe without permission. Suddenly, she had people around her, family, friends, who saw her as enough without needing her to shrink. That clarity hit hard. Pain didn't vanish, but it started making sense. Jenny never hated Indian culture. She respected it, learned from it, tried to live within its rules. But she started to see the difference between culture and control, between love and obligation, between patience and silence. You don't have to attack tradition to see how it chokes individuality when wielded like a weapon. Her tone changed first, then her expectations, then her energy. The woman who used to pause every time someone disapproved? Gone. The woman who begged for updates on immigration? For timelines? For definition? Done. In that studio, Jenny didn't just return to her country. She returned to herself. And with it came a steady kind of courage. The kind that doesn't promise explosions but promises no more pleading. Because once you've remembered what respect feels like, you stop tolerating anything that requires you to earn it every single day. Distance doesn't break love, but it does test the lies holding it together. Now that she could walk away, could he still stand still? In the past, Sumit's hesitation felt like caution. Now, it just feels like cover. Because once Jenny stopped asking, his silence stopped looking thoughtful. It looked like avoidance. The kind that stalls until the other person either forgets or gives up. Only this time, she didn't do either. Suddenly, all his flip-flops started adding up. One week, he's pushing back against his mother's control, airing frustration about living in her house, how suffocating the rules are. The next week, he's defending those same rules like they're sacred. Same walls. Different story. Depending on who's watching. It wasn't confusion. It was curation. Tailoring his opinion to the safest room in the house. When his parents were around, he was the respectful son. When alone with Jenny, he was the frustrated husband. When called out publicly, he was the calm mediator. But beneath each version sat the same reality. He never picked a side unless he was forced to. And Jenny had been his emotional landing pad. She caught the guilt. She softened the blow. She gave him room to stretch every decision until it no longer needed to be made. And every time she asked for something clear, cut the cord, make a move, say it plain, he'd pull out the same old card, "You're making it too hard." But let's be honest, what was really hard? Standing up to his family? Or continuing to let his wife question her value while he acted like things were complicated? Guilt became the leash. Every time she grew restless, he reminded her of his stress, his sacrifice. Told her to be patient because he was trying. But trying without a timeline becomes its own kind of gaslight. She was always one wrong sentence away from sounding selfish, and he was always one hesitant sigh away from sounding noble. It was a trap. One rewarded with comfort, for him. Stability, food on the table, family cushion still intact. Jenny, on the other hand, had identity losses disguised as love, and when she finally tapped out, his calm cracked. Because now, the patience he leaned on was gone. Her silence didn't mean surrender. It meant freedom. The hold guilt had on her dissolved the moment she realized she didn't have to prove her loyalty to someone who had never given her full commitment. He was used to her hesitation. He didn't plan for her certainty. Speak fast or lose her, because waiting was never passive. If guilt was his language, silence now speaks louder than anything. It started with a picture that wasn't real, a version of Sumit that didn't exist. A man Jenny fell for before she even knew his real name. Most love stories don't begin with a lie, but theirs did. And somehow, instead of ending there, it continued. Because Jenny forgave. She believed people could change. And she made space for that change, even when the truth should have been enough to walk away. But it didn't stop at catfishing. When the truth came out, so did another secret. Sumit was married. Not vaguely committed, not emotionally confused, but legally tied to someone else. Still, Jenny stayed, because by then, she'd invested years, feelings, and a future she had already started to rearrange around him. Was she brave? Was she in denial? Maybe both. The marriage finally happened, but even that came slow. Each hurdle wasn't cleared. It was dragged past. His family still disapproved. Cultural clashes still loomed. But Jenny kept buying time. Like, eventually love and endurance would equal security. But security doesn't arrive through survival. It arrives through choice. Hers were always extreme. Love him or leave. Wait or lose him. Forgive or start over alone. And through it all, you start to wonder, did Sumit ever carry half that weight? Or did Jenny spend years building the house, while he kept looking for the safest exit? Maybe the truth both of them avoided is this. The relationship was never balanced. One person was reaching, the other was adjusting. And what looked like partnership on screen felt like negotiation behind the scenes. Every decision cost Jenny something intimate. Her time, her comfort, her voice. And every time she swallowed another delay, it made it harder to speak up the next time. Because speaking up started to look like failure. And failure felt heavier than compromise. So she kept swallowing until she didn't anymore. And maybe that's what made their love dangerous. Not because it was explosive, but because it ran on slow burning tension. Neither of them walked away, not because they felt strong, but because they felt stuck. And now that Jenny's no longer stuck, we're left asking the question they never wanted to say out loud. When loss feels more honest than staying, freedom is already packed. Or were they both addicted to endurance disguised as love? This isn't the kind of moment that shows up in wedding albums. It's the kind that builds slowly, under every polite smile, every delayed promise, every quiet moment where love should have spoken, but didn't. Jenny and Sumit didn't just reach a breaking point. They arrived at a fork carved by years of pretending endurance meant loyalty, of using silence as a way to survive instead of solve. From the outside, it might have looked brave, a woman giving up everything for a man and staying against every obstacle. But when loyalty turns into performance, it stops being love. It starts being fear. Fear of loss, fear of regret, fear of acknowledging that maybe, after all this time, believing in someone louder than they believed in you only leaves you with an identity shaped by sacrifice. Sumit never shouted. He avoided. He framed his inaction as caution, his pauses as politeness, his hesitations as cultural consideration. But the pattern always looked the same. When choices got hard, he stalled. Jenny carried the weight, so he didn't have to. Again and again. He said he loved her. And maybe he did. But did he love her enough to face discomfort? Enough to fight the battles instead of letting her stand alone in them? Or did he, somewhere along the way, start loving the version of Jenny who absorbed the pressure without complaint more than the woman she was when she finally stood up and said no? Because now, for the first time, Jenny's not whispering. She's not asking. She's not hoping. She's watching. And Sumit can feel her patience breaking in real time. Everything he used to delay, the choices he could put off with a not yet, that window is gone. Put yourself in her place. Would you still be waiting after 10 years, 2 betrayals, and a life spent proving your worth to people who wouldn't even say your name without a grimace? Would you still be bending in rooms that never welcomed you in the first place? Survival starts to feel insulting when it's dressed up as commitment. Something has to break. And not in 5 years. Not after another season. Now, it's no longer about who loves more. It's about who's willing to face the cost of choosing. Because one of them still has shelter, and one of them has already packed her clarity and gone. Sumit still talks about future plans in vague shapes. Jenny's already pictured her next step in exact colors. And what's left isn't a marriage, it's a standoff. One slow eye blink away from collapse. Deciding late feels like betrayal to the person who waited early. Choosing him kept costing her. Was there anything left to pay with? They never said the word out loud. No one looked into the camera and admitted it. No legal documents were signed. No scenes of removing a ring, packed bags, slammed doors. But if you listened closely, you could feel it. A soft finality, hanging in the air like a heartbeat, skipped mid-sentence. Divorce wasn't spoken. It was implied in every pause, every breath, every moment. Sumit avoided eye contact, while Jenny sat still in her chair. Because Jenny's calm? That wasn't peace. It was closure. Not the kind that comes after a breakup, but the kind that comes before one. When you know what's coming and you've already emotionally left the room. That's what it looked like as she answered questions without blinking. Balanced, but distant. Measured, but already gone. Sumit, on the other hand, looked like someone trying to remember the steps to a dance that used to work. He said the right words. He smiled nervously. He even looked vaguely affectionate. But it didn't land. Not this time. Because once the balance shifts, once the waiting ends, the dance stops working. She wasn't reacting to him anymore. She was observing. And no matter how hard he tried to pretend things were fixable, every second proved that the fix should have happened years ago. This wasn't pride. It wasn't ego. It was exhaustion, finding its voice. You can't keep asking someone to hold on without giving them a hand to hold. And now, Jenny had her own hand. And she was using it to steady herself, not to pull him closer. She'd spent years disappearing piece by piece, always adjusting, always hoping, always stretching herself a little thinner so Sumit could coast a little longer. But when she got back to the States, the mirror changed. She could see herself again. And suddenly, it was painfully obvious what she'd been trading all along. Freedom isn't flighty. It's not impulsive. It's knowing your voice matters and refusing to leave it in someone else's grasp. And for Jenny, freedom didn't mean she stopped caring. It meant she stopped compromising care for consistency. She stopped picking survival over self. And she stopped needing proof that his version of love could ever match hers in weight. That's why the room felt heavier when Jenny spoke. Not louder, but heavier. Like everyone, including Sumit, was realizing what she wasn't saying. Because once a soft voice finds its spine, there's no going back to soft again. Sumit thought hesitation kept her near. But hesitation only works when the other person believes change is still coming. Jenny didn't believe anymore. And people love to ask, what was the final straw? That's the wrong question. It was never one moment. It was hundreds. It was birthdays ignored, promises stalled, sweatpants being controversial, intimacy scheduled by approval. Apologies timed with next steps that never came. Every little thing she forgave quietly added up in the background. Until her patience didn't run out, it simply matured into perspective. Now Sumit faces something he's never had to before. Pressure without cushion. Because Jenny's not crying, people know what to do with tears. Jenny's focused. People don't know what to do with that. He's saying all the same things. I love you. Don't leave. Let's fix this. But they don't sound like love anymore. They sound like fear. And fear doesn't inspire confidence. It reveals gaps. Jenny used to fill those gaps with hope. Now she fills them with silence. And silence is louder than any declaration when someone's already decided they're done begging. Can this still be saved? Maybe. But not by recycling the same empty promises on a loop. Not by playing both sides, family peacekeeper and hesitant husband. The only way forward would demand something Sumit's never done without blinking. Choosing her fully, without the net, without the stall, without the delay strategy that's expired. But here's the trap. Saving the marriage now would actually cost him more than ever. He'd lose face, lose family clarity, risk it all. Which is why his love may have always lived safer when it was surrounded by conditions. Conditions Jenny no longer accepts. You can't ask someone to stay in a love where growth means disappearing. And you can't point to culture when the only person who keeps shrinking is the one who moved for you. Culture is not a shield for passivity. It's not a weapon to keep someone quiet. It's supposed to be shared, not used to justify imbalance. And maybe the most brutal truth is this: Sumit was never the villain. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't heartless. He was just too comfortable, too used to not choosing until choosing was safe. But love that waits for safety before it acts isn't love. It's insurance. Now viewers are left wondering, what could he say? What should he say? Maybe more important, is it too late to say anything at all? Jenny is no longer asking for loyalty. She's asking for alignment. And she's asking without words. Because at the end of a long relationship, the battle isn't between love and hate. It's between clarity and control. Maybe the scariest thing for Sumit isn't losing her. It's realizing she won't fight anymore. That her silence isn't the beginning of another round. It's the end of the entire game. The tell-all didn't reveal the end. It revealed who had already decided it. The next word out of his mouth won't prove who he loves. It'll prove who he's willing to lose.